Joel Bruckman, live on Main Street, where today everyone is a little bit Irish, except, of course, for the gays and the Italians.
During my run doing The Simpsons and Me, I've spoken about Christmas episodes. I've made Halloween episodes a yearly thing on this recurring series I'm doing. I've done Thanksgiving episodes, and I've even done a Valentine's Day episode. But due to The Simpsons' long existence and constantly shifting staff of writers, I think they've pretty much done an episode themed around every American holiday and possibly a few non-American holidays too. For as much as I have badmouthed Season 8 in the past, and will probably continue to do in the future, when Season 8 has a hit, it hits it out of the park, which brings me to Homer versus the 18th Amendment. An episode that is so bizarre and over the top in its concept that it transcends being stupid and ends up being brilliant. Like, Homer versus the 18th Amendment is full speed, ahead, right out of the gate, all out. It doesn't let up for a second of its 22-minute runtime. It is just pure non-stop laughter, and it doesn't skimp on the plot or the character moments in favor of the jokes. I would go as far as to say that I consider Homer vs. the 18th Amendment to be a Mastercraft Simpsons episode. The opening St. Patrick's Day bit is gold for every single second of it, from Lisa being uncharacteristically sadistic towards Bart,
No one's pinching his legs!
to the parade just breaking down into literal riot conditions and a complete mockery of the Irish, both in terms of the actual in-universe events and in terms of the jokes.
All this drinking, violence, destruction of property, are these the things we think of when we think of the Irish?
I think as a kid, I learned that you're supposed to pinch people who don't wear green on St. Patrick's Day because of this episode. And then when I got older and became a teenager and St. Patrick's Day turned into this like big drinking event, was around when I first learned about the Troubles in the UK and Ireland and all that shit. And when I saw the British fish and chips place blow up during this scene, like realizing the joke finally, I completely lost it. It was like the funniest shit ever because I just recently learned that the Irish were actually doing that in the UK. And I would jokingly talk about how on St. Paddy's Day we had to blow up a British fish and chips place. I think one of the greatest benefits of having watched The Simpsons since childhood is that even to this day there are jokes that I'm picking up on that I didn't understand when I was younger. But honestly, I think the St. Patrick's Day parade segment might be one of, if not my favorite opening segments of a Simpsons episode. It's just so chaotic and hilarious. The fighting, it almost turning into an orgy in the street.
Everybody get naked. Come on, don't be stuck up. It's going to be great.
Well, why not? This party's just getting started!
And Bart accidentally getting wasted.
What are you looking at?
Like, if we did a top 10 best opening setups in Simpsons history, this one could potentially be at number 1. And, you know, that's not hyperbole. I honestly love every second of this opening segment. It's ridiculous. And because of the events of the St. Patrick's Day parade, Springfield starts to bring back Prohibition, having found out that it's actually been in effect, but just not enforced for over 200 years. And from here, the whole thing becomes a parody of the Untouchables. Bootlegging becomes the norm in Springfield, and they even bring in a kind of Elliot Ness parody character with Rex Banner. Now, I don't talk about this often because it's never really had a chance to come up based on things I've reviewed, but one of my favorite set pieces for fiction or film or television in general is the 1920s and 30s. I honestly don't know what it is, if it's just the style or the architecture, or like how the 30s and the 20s in general looked, or like elements of the culture. I don't know if it's just all of it. But I love the Untouchables, I love the Call of Duty Zombies map Shadows of Evil, and even though the show blows ass, I do love the overall feel of Boardwalk Empire. There's just something so appealing and cool about the 30s and all that shit, and I've like read up on it, so like I understand like Prohibition and stuff like that at a certain level. Not that you need to understand any of it to get this episode, but it certainly helps if you're somebody who likes that era, and somebody who has seen The Untouchables, because it does make quite a few references to that movie and the show just a little bit. So for The Simpsons to do an episode that pays tribute to The Untouchables and satirizes that era definitely makes it appeal to me more than it may appeal to someone else. Everyone in Springfield's reaction to Prohibition is great. We see the expected ones, but then we see Hibbert's wife being there, and that just adds to it on a higher level. And of course, being an episode that satirizes Prohibition, we get an obligatory Fat Tony appearance.
You didn't see nothing.
I don't know why people are always bad-mouthing the Mafia.
But all of this pales in comparison to the fact that Homer vs. the 18th Amendment features my all-time favorite Chief Wiggum moment.
Better turn on the all Wiggum charm. Oh boy, that sounded bad.
Like, the way they draw Wiggum trying to, like, strut over to Helen Lovejoy is really funny, but the real kicker here is how Helen Lovejoy screams fucking bloody murder. I don't know how long Maggie Roswell was in the recording booth running takes of this, but she killed it. It's so brutal sounding, and it's like, Chief Wiggum isn't even doing anything, like, that bad yet. But the funniest thing is, like, being a man and, you know, being drunk in, like, public places at bars and shit, like, I've had it where it's like I'm wasted to the point where I feel like I'm hot shit and I'm God's gift to women, and I try to pull out the old auto charm. And on my end, it looks like, you know, I'm a fucking Riz master, but on the woman's end, she probably thinks, I'd like to take this time to apologize to any women I may have flirted with while drunk. I don't understand that I look like an idiot when I do it. Note, I have never done anything without somebody's consent, so don't jump to that conclusion. Dave Thomas makes a guest appearance as Rex Banner, who, as I mentioned earlier, is sort of an Elliot Ness-type prohibition officer. His entire existence is bizarre because The Simpsons takes place in modern times, but Rex Banner seems to be like he's stuck in the 20s and 30s. Like, he's getting telegrams, he's like a fish out of time.
But you people remember, baby turtles and alligators may seem like a cute idea for a pet, but they grow up.
But after booting Chief Wiggum out of power, he does get results.
How do you know you don't like bribes if you've never taken one? Here.
Say, this is nice. No bribes.
Okay, you win. From now on, we'll stick to smuggling heroin.
See that you do.
Now immediately, like, this is just Dave Thomas doing, like, a slight variation of his regular speaking voice, but the vibe I get from his portrayal of Rex Banner is, like, a shot fired at Kevin Costner's performance in The Untouchables. Kevin Costner is often criticized for his wooden and emotionless acting, and they take this aspect and run with it with the Rex Banner character, making him a flat, one-dimensional, hard-boiled prohibition agent. He's so emotionless that he's actually incapable of laughter.
The idea that someone like that could operate under my very nose is laughable. Well, you all know what laughter sounds like.
The character of Rex Banner is fucking ridiculous, and Dave Thomas's flat Costner-esque delivery on every line just makes it funnier, even when he's completely overreacting to a situation.
Hello, fishies! Listen, Rummy, I'm gonna say it plain and simple. Where'd you pinch the hooch? Is some blind tiger jerking suds on the side? Yes?
And honestly, his, like, gratuitous use of, like, 30s slang and, like, his general attitude of, like, just calling people, like, these nicknames based on a vague description of them just kills me. Because, like, yeah, that was a thing back then.
Open up, Curly! This is a raid!
A raid? Curly?
But Rex Banner, for as funny as he is, takes a backseat to the entire plot of Homer getting into bootlegging. First by digging up the beer that Duff dumped in a landfill before going out of business.
Well, that's the end of me.
And when he runs out of that beer, he starts trying to brew booze himself. And all of this is just perfect comedy.
What on earth happened down there? One of the stills...
Nothing, Marge. I think it must have been that bean I had for dinner.
My dad specifically often quoted the bean line a lot. It's ridiculous that Homer thinks that he can get away with saying, like, a single bean is causing these explosions out of his ass. So we get a lot of Prohibition-era antics, some cool little, like, action sequences, a little thing with, like, his underground system for delivering the alcohol, and then the episode concludes with Homer deciding to give up bootlegging after he explodes. Throughout the episode, Chief Wiggum is going through a downward spiral, having lost his job, and Homer decides to do the right thing and help him get his job back. But then Homer is set to be executed by catapult. Banner gets his comeuppance.
Send him back to Mama, boy.
That was unexpected.
And before Homer can be catapulted, we learn that the entire time, just a few lines below the scroll where it showed the law and prohibition, we see that it was revoked, so literally none of the events of this episode had to happen. A nice little screw the audience joke at the end. This episode is pretty perfect. Like, it's funny, its plot is engaging, and it manages to seamlessly transition from its opening to its main plot. It is a singular plot episode, but it's got kind of an ensemble feeling because you're seeing Banner and you're seeing Homer, so it's like a tight focus. But nevertheless, the characters that it does decide to utilize don't get left out. Like, everybody gets a good moment in this episode. Homer, Barney, Marge, even Lisa. It's a good parody of The Untouchables, and while its premise is a little bit out there, even for The Simpsons, it's enjoyable and fun. And one neat thing that I like about this episode, before I get to the rating, is I like how it takes a premise that, like, you'd think Marge would be very disapproving of it, but she's actually into it, and I think that's pretty funny. But then she obviously puts her foot down when things start exploding. It's nice to see characters sometimes being uncharacteristic as long as it actually works. I love this episode, and you know what? I am fully comfortable dropping a 10 out of 10 on it. It is just too ridiculous and too fun of an episode not to drop a 10 out of 10 on. The writers were on fire. When a Simpsons episode can perfectly chain together the big funny moments with the smaller funny moments and still make the plot cohesive, it's perfect. I wouldn't consider this episode a staple, and I know like nobody is putting this in their top 10s, but this was an episode that whenever it came on in syndication, I was genuinely excited because it was so out there and yet worked so perfectly. So yeah, I'm giving this a rare 10 out of 10 just because it is so thoroughly enjoyable and hilarious. While I tend to gravitate towards the more grounded Simpsons episodes, every so often a full-out ridiculous one is perfectly fine. So what are your thoughts on Homer versus the 18th Amendment? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, share my videos, and do all that good shit. Happy St. Patty's Day, nobody's pinching his legs.
Ow! Those gears down there really hurt!